The moment Sebastián Cruz dragged himself onto the Texas riverbank, coughing up the Rio Grande's muddy water and feeling American soil beneath his bleeding hands, he thought the hardest part was behind him, not knowing that the real nightmare was waiting in the shadows of the salt cedars, watching him celebrate victory that had already turned to defeat. 3 men emerged from the brush like predators who'd been hunting this spot for years, their faces hidden by darkness, but their intentions clear in a way they surrounded him before he could even stand. They didn't wear uniforms or carry badges, just the casual confidence of those who knew no help would come, no witnesses would speak, and that a soaking wet Argentine who just risked drowning was in no position to fight back. When they took everything, his money, his phone, even the plastic bag containing his documents, and left him barefoot in the Texas desert with nothing but wet clothes and the dawning realization that crossing the river had been the easy part, Sebastián understood that borders existed not just in water and walls, but in the humans who hunted the spaces between laws. But to understand how a 35-year-old architect from Buenos Aires ended up walking through Texas brush in bloody feet, praying in Spanish to any god who might listen, you need to go back to the moment Argentina stopped being home. The economic collapse had come in waves, each one taking more of Sebastián's carefully built life. First, a small architecture firm where he'd worked for 8 years, shuttered when clients stopped paying. Then his savings, evaporated by inflation that made yesterday's fortune today's bus fare. Finally, his apartment, sold for a fraction of its worth to buy dollars on the black market. The only currency that held value in a country where the peso had become a cruel joke. His daughter Sophia was 7, old enough to ask why they ate rice every night, too young to understand that her architect father now delivered food on a borrowed motorcycle. His wife Elena worked 3 jobs, none of which paid enough to keep them afloat. They were drowning in Buenos Aires, and Sebastián decided he'd rather risk actual drowning if it meant a chance at sending money home. The plan was straightforward desperation. Fly to Mexico City on a tourist visa. He still had credit for one last plane ticket. Make his way north to the border, cross the Rio Grande, reach Houston where his cousin managed a construction company and had promised work, send money home, bring his family later, legally, once he'd established himself. The same dream that had pulled millions northward, each believing their story would be different. Mexico City to Reynosa took 2 weeks and most of his remaining money. Buses through landscapes that grew progressively more dangerous, checkpoints where authorities took bribes with practiced efficiency, cheap hotels where migrants shared stories and warnings. By the time he reached the border, Sebastián had $1,500 hidden in various places and a contact for a coyote who knew the river crossings. The coyote, a weatherman called El Viejo, was honest about the risks. The river looked calm but had currents that had claimed hundreds. Border Patrol used sensors, drones, night vision. Even if you made it across, you had miles of ranch land to traverse before reaching any road. But for $2,000, more than Sebastián had, he'd provide guidance to a crossing point, basic supplies, and pick up on the other side. Sebastián negotiated desperately. $1,500 was all he had. His cousin would pay the rest once he reached Houston. He had an architecture degree, spoke English, wasn't trying to disappear into America's shadows. El Viejo was unmoved. $2,000 or find another way. The river didn't negotiate. That's when he met the others planning to cross without guides. 2 Honduran brothers who'd been deported before and knew the routes. A Guatemalan woman with her teenage son. A group forming out of shared desperation and pooled knowledge. They'd studied Google Earth screenshots, memorized landmark descriptions from those who'd succeeded, planned to cross at a narrow point where the current was supposedly manageable. No guide meant no safety net, but also no debt. They'd help each other, share supplies, increase their chances through numbers. Sebastián joined them with the gratitude of a drowning man finding driftwood. His $1,500 bought supplies for everyone: water, energy bars, plastic bags for documents, cheap phones with GPS loaded. He became valuable through his resources, accepted through his vulnerability. They waited 3 days for the right conditions. No moon for cover, low river levels, Border Patrol shift patterns that suggested a window around 3 a.m. The days passed in a safe house that was anything but safe, crowded with other migrants, thick with fear and hope in equal measure. Sebastián called Elena each night, lie about his proximity to Houston. Hearing Sophia ask when Daddy was coming home. The night of crossing came moonless and perfect. They walked for 2 hours through Mexican scrubland, reaching the river at a point where city lights faded and darkness ruled. The Rio Grande looked deceptively peaceful, just dark water moving steadily northward. On the opposite bank, America waited in the form of more scrubland, more darkness, more unknown. They entered together, holding hands like children playing a dangerous game. The water was colder than expected, the current stronger. What looked like a 100-meter crossing became a diagonal struggle against forces that wanted to sweep them toward the Gulf of Mexico. Sebastián held tight to the teenage boy on one side, one of the brothers on the other, feeling their combined terror through gripped fingers. Halfway across, the human chain broke. The Guatemalan woman lost her footing, went under, came up gasping 20 meters downstream. Her son tried to reach her, breaking from Sebastián's grip. In the darkness and splashing, the group scattered, each person fighting their own battle against the river, solidarity dissolved by survival instinct. Sebastián swam harder than he'd ever swum, architecture muscles fighting current that didn't care about degrees or dreams. His plastic-wrapped documents pressed against his chest, his hidden money feeling heavier with each stroke. Behind him, shouts in Spanish, someone calling for help. Ahead, the American bank that seemed to recede with each desperate movement forward. When his feet finally found purchase on Texas mud, when he dragged himself gasping onto American soil, the relief was overwhelming. He'd made it, crossed the river that claimed so many. His wet clothes, his exhaustion, his racing heart, all proof of victory against odds. He looked back for the others, saw shapes emerging from water, everyone apparently safe. That's when they appeared. 3 men materialized from the salt cedars like they'd been waiting specifically for this moment. Not Border Patrol, no uniforms, no vehicles, no official bearing. Just predators who knew exactly where desperate people emerged from desperate rivers. They moved with practiced efficiency, surrounding the scattered migrants before anyone could run or hide. The leader, a thick-necked man with prison tattoos visible in the starlight, explained the situation in Spanish tinged with American accent. This was their territory. Everyone who crossed here paid a tax. Money, phones, jewelry, anything valuable. Cooperation meant they'd be allowed to continue. Resistance meant being left for Border Patrol, or worse. Sebastián tried to explain he needed the money for transport, for food, for survival. The man laughed, said that wasn't his problem. Said Sebastián should be grateful they weren't taking more than possessions. Said the river was full of people who'd resisted, who thought their architecture degrees or family needs made them special. They were thorough and professional. Found the money in his shoe, the emergency bills in his waistband, the phone wrapped in plastic. Took his documents too, passport, degree certificates, letters of recommendation. Everything that proved who he was, everything that might have helped him find legitimate work. Left him with nothing but soaking clothes and the dawning horror of being undocumented in the truest sense. The others suffered the same fate. The brothers lost money they borrowed from their entire village. The woman lost jewelry that had been her grandmother's. Her son lost a phone with family photos. Everyone stripped of resources they'd need to survive in America, assuming they survived the night at all. When the robbers finally left, disappearing back into the brush to wait for the next group, the migrants faced a new crisis. They were in America but miles from anywhere, without money for transport or food, or even shoes. The robbers had taken those too, knowing barefoot people couldn't run far. The river crossing had delivered them into a different kind of trap. The group scattered, each choosing different directions based on guesses and desperation. The brothers headed east, believing a road lay that way. The woman and son went north, following a fence line. Sebastián chose west, reasoning that Laredo must be somewhere in that direction. They wished each other luck in whispers, knowing they'd likely never meet again. Walking barefoot through Texas brush was its own torture. Every step brought new pain, thorns, rocks, cactus spines that worked deeper with each movement. His architect's feet, soft from years of office work, began bleeding within minutes. The wet clothes that had been uncomfortable became dangerous as the desert night dropped temperatures. He walked for hours, navigating by stars he'd studied on Google Earth, praying his direction was true. The landscape was alien, mesquite trees, prickly pear, creatures that rustled in darkness. Several times he heard vehicles, saw distant lights, but couldn't tell if they were border patrol or civilians or more predators. He hid each time, pressing himself into thorny bushes, adding new wounds to his growing collection. Dawn came like a fever dream. The landscape revealed in pale light, endless and hostile. No roads visible, no buildings, just more brush stretching to every horizon. His feet were raw meat, each step agony. Thirst had become a living thing. His river-wet clothes long since dried by body heat and desert air. He'd traded drowning in water for drowning in sand and silence. The hallucination started around noon. Sophia calling him from behind mesquite trees. Elena asking why he'd left them. Buildings that vanished when he approached. His architecture training tried to maintain spatial reasoning, but dehydration and exhaustion were winning. He was lost in the most fundamental way, not just geographically but existentially, a ghost haunting his own journey. That's when he found the road. Not a major highway, but a ranch road, gravel and dirt, but undeniably human-made. He followed it north, hoping for civilization, finding only more emptiness. Hours passed. His feet left bloody prints on the gravel. His prayers had become wordless rhythms matching his stumbling pace. The pickup truck appeared like a mirage that didn't vanish. An older white man, rancher by appearance, stopped and studied Sebastián with eyes that had seen this before. The man spoke no Spanish. Sebastián's English fled with dehydration. But misery needed no translation. The rancher gestured to the truck bed, drove without questions to the nearest town. Not to immigration authorities, not to police, but to a small medical clinic where a Spanish-speaking nurse treated migrants without documentation requirements. She cleaned his feet, pulled thorns and spines, bandaged wounds that would scar, gave him water, antibiotics, advice about avoiding infection, asked no questions about his crossing, his robbery, his plans. The rancher left $20 and disappeared before Sebastián could thank him properly. The nurse explained this was common. Ranchers who publicly supported border walls but privately showed mercy to those who'd already crossed. The border was complicated, she said, full of contradictions and small kindnesses amid larger cruelties. From the clinic, Sebastián called his cousin Collect, explained the robbery, the loss of everything, his location somewhere in Texas. His cousin wired money for a bus ticket, warned him about checkpoints, told him to buy shoes and blend in. The architecture degree was gone, but construction work didn't require documentation, just willingness to labor and stay quiet. The bus ride to Houston took 12 hours and multiple near heart attacks at each stop, without documents. He was truly illegal now, subject to deportation if discovered. But he made it, arrived at his cousin's apartment, exhausted and forever changed. The river crossing that was supposed to be the hardest part had been just the beginning. He found work within a week. Not designing buildings, but building them, his architect hands learning hammers and saws. The pay was less than he'd made delivering food in Buenos Aires. But dollars stretched further when sent home. He called Elena weekly, spoke to Sophia, who was learning to sound happy even when hungry. The robbery haunted him more than the river crossing. Those men waiting in darkness, knowing exactly where desperate people emerged vulnerable. How many migrants had they robbed? How many dreams had they stolen along with money and documents? The border had its official guardians, but also its unofficial predators, both serving to make crossing harder. 6 months later, he learned one of the Honduran brothers had made it to Dallas. The other had been caught, deported, was planning to try again. No word about the Guatemalan woman and her son. They'd all survived the river, only to face different fates on the American side. The water had been just the first test. Sebastián worked construction for 3 years, sending money home, living in shadows. Never got his documents replaced, never tried to regularize his status. The robbery had taken more than possessions. It had taken his identity, his ability to prove he was beyond just another laborer. The architecture degree might as well have dissolved in the Rio Grande. He thought often about that moment on the riverbank, dragging himself in the water, feeling relief, believing the hard part was over, not seeing the men in the shadows, not knowing that borders extended beyond rivers into humans who exploited border crossers. He prepared for drowning, for border patrol, for desert death, not for other humans who saw vulnerability as opportunity. The scars on his feet became reminders, each step in work boots carrying memory of bloody footprints on Texas roads. He'd crossed the Rio Grande successfully, survived robbery in desert, found work and sent money home. By some measures, a success story. But part of him remained on that riverbank, in that moment between relief and horror, when victory became defeat in the span of 3 men emerging from shadow. Elena and Sophia never joined him. The money he sent kept them fed, but couldn't buy safety from Argentina's continued collapse. There remained voices on phones, pixels on screens, dreams deferred by the reality that crossing meant more than just rivers. It meant robbery, desert walks, bloody feet, and the knowledge that predators waited where laws were weakest. Sebastián Cruz had thought it was over after the river, had believed that reaching American soil meant reaching safety. Instead, he'd learned that borders were ecosystems where official and unofficial forces combined to extract maximum cost from human movement. The river had been honest in its danger. The humans who hunted its banks were the greater threat. He'd made it to America, built a life of sorts, sent money home, survived. But the real border, the one between who he'd been and who he'd become, that had been crossed not in water, but in the moments after, when men emerged from shadows and took everything except his life. The river had been just geography. What came after had been the true crossing, measured in blood and loss, and the understanding that some borders exist not in land or law, but in the spaces where desperation meets predation. He'd thought it was over after the river, but that's when it really began.